Your first failure pertains to cycling, and it is losing at the World Championships in 2003 in Stuttgart. So you were performing the kilo,
Yes, that's right.
which no longer exists.
It exists in a world championship, but not in the Olympics.
Okay.
So I was training I was aiming for the 2004 Olympics as my first, aiming to become Olympic champion for the first time in that event. And I'd won my first world title the year before in 2002 in Copenhagen. And I think in winning the Worlds, I was 26, relatively old to it was a very long and steady sort of chipping away to get to that point, and became world champion. And we also won the team sprint as well in Copenhagen. So a double world champion in 2002. Amazing, achieved a lifetime dream. 2 years to go to the Olympics. It's all looking great. I had the winning formula, or so I thought, the training program to win the Worlds. All I've got to do is replicate that in 2003 and the same result will come. So I was obsessive about doing exactly the same thing as I did in 2002. And I prepared for the Worlds in 2003 in Stuttgart, got to the Worlds, and two things. Well, first of all, copying exactly what I did the previous year. And second of all, I reacted to the people around me. I was the last person to go. In the kilo, it's done in reverse order, one rider on the track at a time. It's a time trial event. Just you got one ride, 1,000 meters as fast as you can. And as I was waiting to get on the track and I was watching all my rivals post their times, I was reacting to their performances. So I was looking at the times they were doing. There were some incredible times. The sea level world record had been broken. And I thought, I've got to change my game plan. I've got to come out the start gate like a scalded cat. I've got to get up on the time, and I've got to really attack this. And what happened was, first of all, I went round, and at every checkpoint you get a time split. You don't hear or see what it is, but the crowd see it. So every checkpoint, as I went round, there was a massive cheer. And I remember coming round at the last lap thinking they're cheering really loudly. I must be doing well here. Crossed the line. I looked up at the scoreboard and I was fourth. And the reason they were cheering was because my time was down on the German rider's time. So they were cheering because I was failing. And I didn't know that. And, I reflected on that World Championships, and I remember thinking, well, I reacted. Instead of sticking to my plan and focusing on what I needed to do and focusing on the process of trying to do the best performance, I was looking at everybody else and not focusing on myself. And second of all, I thought that if you just replicate what you did previously, you'll get the same result. You'll get the same performance, but you don't get the same result because everybody else is constantly trying to find ways to improve. And it was an important lesson because I think if I'd won that year, I would have absolutely have stuck with the same formula the following year, going into the really important one, which was the Olympics. And I would have lost there. But instead, I thought, well, you're not the best anymore. There's nothing to lose here. You have to change parts of this program to find a way to squeeze a few more hundredths or tenths of a second out of your performance. So yeah, it's understanding that you've got to constantly change to improve and focus on yourself. It was such an important lesson. And the other thing was, when you get to that age, when you get to sort of mid to late 20s as a sprinter, whenever that's the kind of the optimal age is really early to mid 20s. So when you're in your late 20s, every time you lose, journalists were saying, so is this, have you peaked? Is this the start of the decline? Which seems ridiculous now looking back, but at the time you're always questioning yourself. And yeah, it was a really difficult time, but it was the kick up the backside that I needed and ultimately led me on to success in Athens.
And was it that experience that also led you to Steve Peters?
Exactly that. So Steve was brought onto the team because of one rider who was looking for that kind of support, and he was a really high profile rider within the team. But even with that rider sort of being brought on for him, there was still a stigma attached to seeing a psychologist, which seems ridiculous now because every professional sports team in the world has a psychologist to help get the best out of the athletes and from the mental side of things. And, if you had an injury, you go and see the physio. If you had a broken bike, you go to the mechanic. So why would you not go to see the psychologist if you were looking to try and optimize your mental side of your performance? But there was still that stigma. So it took a few riders to go and see him. And then eventually I sort of started, I started to engage a little bit with him. but there was definitely a distrust or just I don't know. It was this fear of, I don't know what we're going to do, what we're going to talk about. Is he going to try and read my mind? Is he going to hypnotize me? All these ridiculous things.
Is he going to try and blame my parents?
I'm going to lie on a leather sofa and talk about my childhood, and but actually, Steve, when I first met him and once I started working with him, he's so incredibly practical, very logical, very applied. It's just really simple things and tools and ways to recognize how your brain or the default setting your brain's going to in certain situations, and trying to change that and trying to move away from reacting emotionally, being able to have a plan in certain situations, not becoming a robot and, having, not living life and not enjoying your emotions. Emotions are great, but in certain situations, you don't want to be hijacked by your emotions. So it's recognizing A, how you want to behave and how you want to operate in certain key situations, and B, having a plan for how you make that happen.
There are two things that I find really interesting about Steve Peters's technique that I know you applied to your cancer diagnosis. That idea of controlling the controllables and the helicopter technique. Could you explain what they are and how they've helped you?
Well, the helicopter technique was something I used a lot during or leading up to London in 2012, because I felt huge pressure and mainly from myself, but also externally. This was home games, way more media attention than ever before. I'd had a really successful Olympics in Beijing, so as an individual, I was high profile within the team. So there was this expectation: you have to, it's win or lose. A silver medal is not going to be enough here. I was 36 in London, so that was perceived to be way past my best physically. So dealing with that expectation, that additional attention and pressure, Steve was like, look, imagine yourself in any situation, but for me at that time, it was about, in the track center, on the day, the pressure. Imagine yourself in that situation, getting into a helicopter and just going up and up and up and looking down on the situation you're stressing about. And the higher you go, the further away you are from that problem, but the smaller you become. And also the more you see around you, you start seeing the buildings and the streets around you. And then you keep going up and up, and then you see the whole town or the city, and you see how many people there are, and you realize, actually, I'm a tiny, tiny part of this much, much bigger thing. And my problems are insignificant, in terms of the world that's happening around us. It's really nothing at all. And you, to gain that perspective and to understand, most of the things we worry about are genuinely pretty irrelevant, but we blow them up in our minds. They're bigger than they seem bigger than they are. So yeah, the helicopter technique was always a very helpful one. Controlling the controllables, just focusing on what you can genuinely control. Anything that's out with that, people's opinions or, other riders, what performances they're going to do, the weather, the media, anything at all. You can't control that. So why worry about it? Focus on what you can do, focus on how well you do it, and focus on the process of you doing that. Don't think about the outcome. Don't think about the fear of failure. Don't think about what it might be like to win. Don't think about the gold medal. Just focus on what you need to do and how you need to do it.
And how has that helped you with this particular challenge of living with stage 4 cancer?
Well, I think it's understanding there are things you can control. There are things you can do. From a practical point of view, making sure you have the right advice, making sure as I mentioned at the start, the medical, there's so when you have a cancer diagnosis, one of the first things you'll find is that there's so many people giving you advice, eat this, don't eat this, do this, don't do that, go for this medicine, don't go for that medicine. A friend of mine did this and that helped, etc. Everybody it's coming from a place of kindness. They're trying to help you. They're trying to offer you advice and support. But actually, it's overwhelming and you get all this conflicting advice and conflicting information. So to have somebody like Steve who would go out there and he would try and filter through it, and obviously you've got your oncologists and the people who this is what they do on a daily basis. They know what they're talking about. But actually, it's trying to combine everything together and have a plan for you that's right for you, that optimizes everything you're doing, and trying to give yourself the best possible chance to have as much time as possible. But in terms of controlling the controllables, yeah, I can't change the fact that I've got this diagnosis, but I can choose how I react to it, and I can choose my mindset every day. And as I said before, it's not about bouncing out of bed going, everything's wonderful, because it's not everything is wonderful, and you'd be delusional to think that. But you can actively choose not to engage with the negative side. You can actively, you can allow yourself to wallow. It's like, picking a wound. If you just, once you start doing it, it's going to make it worse. But if you just, at that first stage of allowing those thoughts to go down that negative direction, you just nip it in the bud and say, no, I'm not going to engage with that just now. I'm choosing to focus on what I have control over. And also reminding yourself about being back in the present and enjoying the moment, sitting here, chatting to you, we're having, it's a lovely, I think it's the best way to be, is to focus on the here and the now and not be wishing time away, whether it's, I'm stuck on a plane on Monday on the runway waiting to go. And then there was an announcement, we're still, we're in a queue and it's going to be another half an hour. And everybody's like,
yeah.
Everybody wants to be home. Everyone wants to be getting on to their next destination. And I was exactly the same. But then I managed to sort of nip it in the bud and go, I'm comfortable. I'm in my seat. I've got my AirPods in. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm having a nice time. This is, there's worse things that could be happening right now. And it's not allowing yourself to embrace the negative. I think that is what I've been desperately trying to do.
It's so interesting that so much of your cycling career was about beating the clock, racing to the end. And now you're embracing the same mindset that helps you get there, but almost slowing time down and being in the present. I wonder if I could ask you if that mindset, has it helped you feel, this is such an odd question, but I know that you'll get it. Has it made you feel more positive about death?
I genuinely haven't thought about, in the early days, I thought about death a lot, and that was terrifying. But then actually, you sort of realize, well, it's not here yet. It's an inevitable thing for all of us. Nothing has changed. And, I remember, there's a friend of ours who had a cancer diagnosis a few years ago, and he's doing really well now, thankfully. He's doing fantastically. But it was a scary diagnosis. And when the doctor told him, he said, well, give it to me straight. What's the worst case scenario here? And the doctor said, the worst case scenario is you're going to walk out of here and get hit by a bus. And he said, I'm being serious. And he said, I'm being serious. This is a scary diagnosis and it's not what you want to hear. But anything can happen at any time. None of us are guaranteed to live. None of us are going to live forever. And none of us have a guaranteed, we're not all going to live to 85 or 90 or whatever. So it's about bringing it back to the here and the now. Of course, you can't live as if this is your last day. You still want to plan for tomorrow. You still want to have goals in the future. You still want to work towards something. But it's also remembering today is what counts. Today is the only thing we actually have. So, it was, again, I've gone off on a tangent. I've forgotten. Yeah, death, yes.
I suppose it was also because we were talking about the helicopter technique and that idea of zooming out and going up and seeing the relative insignificance of human life in comparison to the entire universe. Yeah. I wonder if there's also part of you that thinks of death as a transition or an experience that's also part of life, where you become part of something bigger again.
I think when you get us, when I was given my diagnosis, it's the most unnatural and terrifying experience of my life. But when you have time to reflect, death is just a part of nature, and it's life, and you can't have one without the other. So it's understanding that, and actually the gift of this whole situation is the appreciation of life and appreciation of every single day, and the number of things that we all worry about and we all tend to focus on, and it's just an anxious society. Everything is fast. Everything is about what's next. I think I'm still, I've had a busy week. I'm still going from place to place. But while I'm doing that, I'm trying to slow things down in the moment and bring myself back to where I am. A good friend of mine, David Smith, who I mentioned in the book, His favorite line is, be where your feet are. That's his mantra. And I've tried to be where my feet are more. And again, I don't want to come across as some sort of, Zen guru that I am now, completely at peace. This is something you actively have to work on, and it's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not like a switch is flicked in my head and I'm able to do it easily, but I'm working at it and I'm getting better at it. And it has helped me immeasurably. Like, there's absolutely no way I could have sat here 6 months ago and talked about all this without completely folding. So I can see a difference in myself. And I believe that's come from, first of all, the support around me, but mainly because I'm choosing to kind of appreciate all the positivity and appreciate the here and the now.
I hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to check out the full episode of How to Fail wherever you get your podcasts, and also make sure you're following us on social media for all the latest updates.